The best-kept secret at Fairview High walked those hallways for 3 decades in the same 11-year-old Corolla, ate the same modest sandwich at his desk every single day, and let everyone around him assume he was just getting by like the rest of the staff. His name was Arthur. He taught physics, and the week he finally retired, a coworker discovered almost by accident that quiet, forgettable Arthur was sitting on more than $1.3 million. Nobody ever suspected it because Arthur had committed the one truly unforgivable sin in American culture. He looked completely ordinary while being quietly, enormously wealthy. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, a man named Dale, who out-earned Arthur every year for 30 straight years, is standing on the deck of a boat he still hasn't paid off. He named it Liberty. Right now, he's refreshing his banking app, staring at a retirement account holding roughly $38,000. Same 30 years. One quiet millionaire, one loud budget. And the reason for that gap is so plain, it's almost offensive. My name is Grant, and today we're digging into why most people never cross the millionaire line, and why a handful of people quietly, unremarkably, absolutely do. If you've ever stared at your bank balance wondering whether you're doing something fundamentally wrong, or whether the entire system is rigged against you from the start, stay with me because the honest answer is a bit of both. And the numbers tell a story most people won't say out loud. Before we dive in, let me be completely transparent. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, and none of this counts as financial advice. This is simply what happens when someone spends far too many hours staring at the same wealth statistics everyone else scrolls straight past. Let's start with a figure that sounds like fantastic news and is really more of a magic trick. The average American household is technically a millionaire. Seriously, the mean household net worth in the United States sits right around $1,059,000. So on paper, the typical American family has already crossed into millionaire territory. Congratulations to everyone, apparently. Except that isn't the typical family at all, because the median household, the one sitting exactly in the middle with half the country richer and half poorer, is worth closer to $192,000, not $1 million. That massive difference between roughly $1 million and under $200,000 is essentially the entire subject of this video. Here's why those two figures sit so far apart. Averages lie the moment the room becomes lopsided. Picture 9 ordinary people in a bar, and then Elon Musk walks through the door. Suddenly, the average net worth in that bar is somewhere near $40 billion, yet not a single one of those 9 original people can cover their tab. Keep that lopsided bar trick in mind because it resurfaces constantly. A small cluster of extraordinarily wealthy households drags the average sky high, while the real middle sits far, far below it. The wealthiest 1% of households control roughly 31% of the country's total wealth. The bottom half controls somewhere around 2.5%. So when somebody claims the average American is doing just fine, what they're actually describing is the top 15% wearing the rest of the nation as a disguise. It gets worse once you examine what that median net worth is actually built from. Strip out home equity, meaning the value locked inside a house you still have to live in, and the median household drops to roughly $66,000. That's the entire real, liquid, spendable cushion for the family sitting dead center in America. $66,000 standing between them and total financial disaster. So here's the real question worth asking. If the middle-class cushion is that thin, how does anyone ever cross over to the other side? How does an Arthur happen? Because millionaires absolutely do exist. There are roughly 24 million of them across the country, more than any other nation on the planet. Clearly something is working for somebody. So let's talk about who these people actually are, because I promise it isn't who you're picturing. When you imagine a millionaire, you're probably picturing Dale's boat. Inherited wealth, a trust fund, a fancy title, some startup that hit it big. Let's dismantle that image right now. The largest study ever conducted on this subject, a survey covering more than 10,000 American millionaires, found that 79% of them inherited absolutely nothing. Zero. 89% are first-generation wealthy. No one handed them a head start. They built the entire thing from the ground up. And their careers? This is my favorite part. The 5 most common professions among these millionaires were engineer, accountant, teacher, manager, and lawyer. Teachers outranked physicians. Sit with that for a second. The person grading physics exams is statistically more likely to become a millionaire than the person performing your yearly checkup. A third of those millionaires never once earned six figures in any single year of their entire careers. Not once. 93% credited plain, unglamorous consistency, not a massive paycheck for getting them there. And most of them didn't attend some elite institution either. The majority graduated from ordinary public state universities, the exact same kind sitting off the highway in your own state right now. There was no hidden door, no secret cheat code, just an ordinary person with an ordinary job who handled one specific thing differently, and we're about to uncover exactly what that thing was. Here's the part that scrambles people's brains, so let me state it plainly. Income and wealth are not the same thing. They're two entirely separate concepts, and mixing them up is the single costliest mistake in personal finance. There's an old framework dividing people into two categories: the income statement affluent and the balance sheet affluent. The income statement affluent look rich. Big paycheck, big house, big truck, the entire performance. But their actual net worth is practically nothing, because everything coming in immediately flows back out. That's Dale. His problem was never earning money, it was holding on to it. The balance sheet affluent are the exact opposite. They might look aggressively average, modest car, modest house, nothing worth stealing. But their net worth is massive because for decades, they quietly set aside a slice of everything they made. That's Arthur. No one at his school considered him wealthy. He drove an 11-year-old Corolla and packed his own lunch. He simply happened to be a millionaire the entire time and told absolutely no one, because that's typically how it works. Here's what that difference actually looked like in real time. Every couple of years, Dale got a raise, sometimes a solid one. One year it was $12,000 and Dale did what felt perfectly reasonable, which was letting his lifestyle expand to match it. That raise quietly turned into an extra $400 a month toward the truck payment, a slightly larger apartment, nicer dinners he genuinely felt he'd earned. By December, the raise had vanished, absorbed, invisible, and Dale honestly couldn't have told you where it went. He repeated that pattern with every single raise for 30 years. Arthur received smaller raises, and every time one landed, he did something almost aggressively boring with it. He nudged up one automatic transfer, the kind that quietly pulled a bit of money from his checking account on payday before he ever saw it, and then he simply forgot the transfer existed. That's the entire divergence, right there, $400 at a time. One man let the extra money drift toward his lifestyle. The other set it in motion once toward his future, then went back to teaching a room full of teenagers about Newton's laws. So, if income isn't doing the heavy lifting, what is? Let's look at where the actual failure happens, because most people aren't failing at earning. They're failing at a step nobody ever bothered to explain to them. Here's the median again, this time for retirement accounts, and it's genuinely rough. The average 401k balance in America sits around $168,000. Sounds passable, right? Except there's that lopsided bar trick again. That average is Musk walking into the retirement account bar, dragging the number skyward while everyone else nurses a much smaller drink. The median 401k, the one actually in the middle, is closer to $44,000. 3 out of every 4 people hold less than that so-called average, and it gets even more brutal the closer you look at people who should already be prepared. For households right at the doorstep of retirement, ages 55 to 64, the median retirement balance is roughly $107,000. That's supposed to stretch across 20 or 30 years. Calling that a nest egg is generous. It's a nest egg that's been skipping meals and is afraid to check its mail. Now, part of this is genuinely a savings problem, and I want to be fair about that, but I also want to be fair about how razor-thin the margins really are. The personal savings rate in America currently hovers around 3%. 3 cents out of every dollar, and a large portion of the country literally cannot save more because there's nothing left once rent, groceries, insurance, and gas are covered. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans couldn't cover a surprise $1,000 expense using savings. more than a quarter have zero emergency savings whatsoever. So when some finance guru wags a finger and says, just cut back on coffee, understand that for countless households, there was never any coffee to begin with. The cushion disappeared long before the latte did. I want to slow down here because that 3% figure isn't just an abstraction. It's a feeling, and you might know it intimately. It's checking your balance before tapping your card at the grocery checkout. It's doing silent math in the school pickup line, wondering whether the field trip fee and the electric bill can both survive the same week. It's quietly putting one item back on the conveyor belt while the person behind you politely pretends not to notice. It's lying awake at 2 in the morning, calculating for the 4th time whether the check engine light can wait until the next paycheck. That's what a 3% savings rate actually feels like from the inside. It isn't laziness. It's a math problem someone handed you and told you to solve alone, in the dark, with the wrong tools. But here's where things get genuinely fascinating, and by fascinating I mean maddening. Even people who do have room to invest routinely sabotage themselves, and not because they're foolish, because they're human. There's a long-running study tracking what the average investor actually earns compared to what the market freely hands out. Over the last couple of decades, the average investor trailed the overall market by more than a full percentage point every single year. Some years far worse than that. In one recent year, the gap exceeded 8 percentage points. Why? Because when the market dips, people panic and sell. When it surges, greed kicks in and they pile back in. They buy high and sell low over and over, practically guaranteeing they capture the fear and completely miss the recovery. Which brings us to the actual engine driving all of this. The thing Arthur understood and Dale never did. Compounding. And I need you to really absorb this because it's the entire ballgame. Before you assume 7% sounds made up, it isn't. Over the past century, the broad American stock market has returned somewhere close to 10% annually on average before inflation, and roughly 7% after inflation takes its cut. Nobody had to pick some brilliant individual stock to capture that return. You simply had to own the whole market and refuse to flinch. That's the number Arthur quietly rode for 30 years while Dale stayed busy trying to time it, outsmart it, and honestly, mostly ignore it entirely. Let's run the actual math on becoming a millionaire from scratch. If you invest and earn roughly a 7% return, starting at age 30, you'd need to set aside about $610 a month to reach $1 million by retirement. Totally achievable for plenty of households. Not effortless, but achievable. Now watch what happens the moment you delay. Start that exact same plan at 40 instead of 30, and the number jumps to roughly $1,300 a month. Wait until 50? Now you need over $3,200 a month to reach the identical finish line. Same destination, but every decade you wait roughly doubles the cost, because you've stolen years away from the one ingredient compounding actually depends on, which is time. And here's the cruelest, most beautiful detail about staying invested over time. Nearly all of the market's total gains come from a tiny handful of days. If you'd invested $10,000 20 years ago and stayed put the entire time, you'd have ended up with roughly $72,000. But if fear got the better of you and you jumped out, missing just the 10 best days across those 20 years, you'd end up with less than half of that. Miss a handful more of those days and you'd barely break even. The cruel part is that those explosive best days almost always land right beside the scariest worst days. So the people who panic and sell during a crash typically miss the rebound by mere hours. Arthur never sold. Honestly, Arthur barely even looked. That was the entire strategy. Do absolutely nothing on purpose for 30 straight years. Now, I could stop right here and say, see, just invest early and don't panic, and pretend this is simply a story about personal willpower. But that would be dishonest, and you'd see right through it. Because for millions of people, the reason they never reach millionaire status has nothing to do with discipline, and everything to do with a system that quietly locked the door before they ever arrived. Let me show you exactly what I mean. That entire beautiful compounding machine, the 401k, the automatic contributions, the employer match, all of it, 42% of full-time workers have zero access to any workplace retirement plan whatsoever. None. And it breaks down precisely along the lines you'd expect. Among the lowest earners, nearly 79% have no access at all. Among the highest earners, that figure drops to 18%. So, the single most powerful wealth-building tool in American life, the tax advantages, the free matching money, the effortless automatic investing, gets handed out most generously to the people who already need it the least. It's like a government program distributing free umbrellas, but only to the people already standing indoors. The ones actually getting rained on simply don't qualify. That isn't a personal failing, that's the architecture of the entire system. And then there's the ground everyone's standing on, which has been quietly tilting for the past 40 years. Since roughly 1980, wages for the typical worker have barely inched forward. Meanwhile, housing has grown dramatically more expensive relative to income. Healthcare costs have outrun paychecks by a wide margin, and college tuition has gone completely feral. A home used to cost roughly 3 times the typical household's income. Now it's over 5 times that. So the leftover money previous generations had available to invest, the surplus that fed the compounding machine, has been steadily consumed by the basic cost of having shelter, healthcare, and an education. You're not imagining it. The gap between the raise you received and the life it's supposed to buy is real and measurable. When your parents tell you they bought their first home at your age on a single salary, they're not lying, and they're not smarter than you. They simply happened to be standing in the economy before the floor started tilting. Same effort, completely different physics. Put it all together and the picture becomes clear. You can only ride the wave if you already own a surfboard, so the last several decades of surging home and stock prices didn't lift the people holding no assets at all. It left them further behind than ever. That's exactly why the wealth gaps between different groups aren't shrinking. The typical white family holds several times the wealth of the typical Black or Hispanic family. And when asset prices boom, that dollar gap doesn't narrow, it widens. Booms reward the people who are already positioned inside the system. So if you've been sitting here this entire time feeling a quiet hum of shame, feeling like everyone else received a manual you were never given, I need you to hear this clearly. You are not the problem. A 3% savings rate isn't a national character flaw. It's the mathematical fingerprint of an economy where the essentials devour the paycheck before that paycheck ever gets a chance to build anything. The system isn't broken. It's functioning exactly as it was designed to. It simply wasn't designed with you in mind. By the way, quickly, since we're already talking about building something from nothing in a difficult economy, I started a free community where I break down exactly this kind of material. How to grow real income streams and stay on track even when the entire system feels stacked against you. It costs nothing, even if you're starting completely from zero. The link is in the description if that interests you. Okay, so the system is tilted, the door is locked for a huge number of people, and the math shows no mercy. Where does that actually leave you right now, specifically? It leaves you somewhere far more hopeful than it sounds, and I genuinely mean that. Because here's the strange twist sitting at the center of all of this. The thing I promised you at the very beginning was almost insulting. The recipe is stupidly simple. It's genuinely one of the most boring recipes on the entire planet. Buy a low-cost fund that owns essentially the entire market. Put money in automatically every single month, so you never have to feel brave about it, and then do the single hardest thing any human being can attempt, which is nothing. Don't sell when it drops. Don't get clever. Don't try to outsmart it. That's the whole thing. That's the secret the boat salesman doesn't want hanging on your wall. Congratulations! You just learned the entire strategy in a single sentence, and somehow it's less thrilling than assembling flat-pack furniture. And I know exactly what you're thinking right now because I'd be thinking the same thing. You're thinking, Grant, that's easy for someone with leftover money at the end of the month, but I don't have $600 a month just sitting around. And you might be completely right. That's the honest part nobody wants to say out loud. If the margin isn't there yet, the answer isn't to hate yourself over it. It's to understand precisely what this game actually is, so that the moment even a little breathing room opens up, a raise, a paid-off car, some side income, you aim it straight at the machine instead of straight toward a nicer version of Dale's boat. Because that's the real difference between these two men. It was never about the size of the shovel. Dale had a bigger shovel every single year of his life. Arthur simply started digging earlier in the same exact spot and refused to stop, refused to panic, and refused to let a decent salary convince him he was already wealthy. Dale spent 30 years looking rich. Arthur spent 30 years quietly being rich, and those two things are almost never the same person. So no, most people will never become millionaires, and a great deal of that genuinely isn't their fault. The plans are locked away from the people who need them most. Wages stalled out. The essentials grew greedy. All of that is true, and pretending otherwise would be insulting. But some people do make it, and when they do, it almost never resembles the boat. It looks like a physics teacher in an 11-year-old Corolla who did the boring thing for a very long time and told absolutely nobody. The math is unforgiving, but it isn't a secret, and it isn't magic. It's simply early, boring, and relentless, applied consistently to whatever bit of room you can carve out for yourself. And if you can find even a small piece of that room, that quiet, unglamorous room, and start pointing it toward the future instead of toward the boat, then 30 years from now, you get to become the person nobody ever realized was wealthy the entire time. If you want help finding that first bit of breathing room, that community is waiting for you. Either way, start today, because the one thing you can never buy back later is time.